very obviously, when I frame it like that, almost all failures are caused by external forces, bad luck, the market, whatever, inflation, and our decisions we made or capacities we have. It's always a balance of both. And we can learn from both, but the unfortunate part of that is that when we don't look like the person people expect, we hear that message over and over again that it was our fault when we failed. And we can start to internalize that message.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Hello, dear listener. Today, I've decided to introduce myself. We overlooked that in the first two episodes of this season. So I'm Gina Patterson. I'm the CPO for Venture for Canada. I design and run VFC's national programs. Scott Sturrett, VFC's CEO, is taking a little break from hosting, and I'm going to bring you season 11 of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. This season attempts to tease apart the reality from the expectation of what it feels like to be an entrepreneur in Canada. Today, I have a very special conversation for you. We're going to talk to Ashley Good, the CEO and founder of the world's first failure consultancy. Fail Forward supports people and organizations to acknowledge, create, and evolve from failure. Ashley is also a half Ironman triathlete, writer for the Globe and Mail Leadership Lab, Public Sector Digest, and the World Economic Forum Agenda. Her work has received coverage in a wide range of media outlets, including the Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times, and Fast Company. We have a very intimate conversation with Ashley, getting into the nitty-gritty of what it feels like to be her and what it feels like to fail and how we can fix the negative associations we have with it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ashley. Welcome to A New Wave, Ashley. It is so good to have you here.
So good to be here, Gina. Thank you.
I'm excited about our conversation today because we're talking about failure, which is not something that people usually like to talk about, but I think it's pretty exciting, especially with your expertise and background. So I want to dive right in. And can you tell me why we need to talk about it?
Mm. Well, I perhaps the number one reason is that often when we fail is when we feel the most alone.
Mm.
Um, like everyone else has it figured out and it all looks, shiny and perfect and easy for everyone else. Why is it so hard for us? You know, and I think those moments when we can have those conversations, those real conversations about what hasn't worked, we realize how ubiquitous the experience is. Others, when we're vulnerable and share our own failures, others share their failures back with us. And it gives us that moment to not feel so alone.
Well,
Sorry, I was going to say the other reason is that it reduces the shame.
Mm.
We think that folks will judge us for our failures, but when we have the chance to share it and get those words, out of our head and heart, and have somebody we love kind of support us through that moment, all the shame and regret we have gets processed in those conversations. So it can be very healing to have that conversation with somebody who can support us.
As a company and a company culture, is there a connection between failure, comfort with failure, and the bottom line? Like, is there a business case for failure?
Um, I think there's kind of an obvious one of we need to be willing to try new things, to take risks, to set up out of our comfort zone, because if it was easy, somebody else would have done it and figured it out. So we have to be willing to do new things, which is always scary. Yeah, that would, but I feel that's almost too obvious to say. And you're listening to this.
No, it's good because for me, I think if we're like, it's sort of teasing apart failure for our listeners who are just like dropping in and just like, what is failure mean? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What are examples of failure? I think it feels like one of the results of a fear of failure is not taking a risk, maybe. Maybe that's what we're saying, at least in a business context, and perhaps therefore in a personal context, because business is personal decisions, that someone is making. And so I think if that's true, so if failure feels and looks like not taking a risk, or at least if we give in to our fear, then is our goal to get rid of our fear of failure?
So I love this question. I think it's unrealistic to say we could get rid of our fear of failure. Everybody has a fear of failure. And I don't actually think we would want to, even if we could. So on one hand, yes, that fear of failure can be immobilizing, and that is obviously going to hold us back from testing the limits of our potential.
Mm.
But that fear, acknowledging that fear when it's there, can also be extraordinarily helpful. We need those moments, that reminder in our head that says like, "Whoo, like this is new, and we might not have it all figured out, and it might not go as we planned," and use that as a signal to, prepare for that speech that you're giving on stage, or do a little bit more research so we can feel a little bit more comfortable with our direction. Or it can, that fear can be very useful if it's coming from a real place, identifying real risks. So I think the differentiator we need here is that, that feeling is going to feel the same regardless. How do we get good at asking ourselves and interrogating that feeling to say, okay, what is this feeling trying to warn me about? And is it real? Is that risk real? And if it's real, is there something I can do about it? And not letting it just immobilize us and stop us from asking, but actually, spurn us into action to take smarter action going forward. That's the ideal.
Yes. Okay. So I love that. And so that's what my sort of fear is with this. It's sort of like, well, when you check in with your gut or you check in with the butterflies or the stress in your breathing, when you're thinking about something, what is it? How do you know that there's not a tiger around the corner? How do you know that, this is just my fear of public speaking and I should go and do it anyway?
Totally.
Or we've never taken this direction with our product and we're going to try this new thing. And so is it fair to paraphrase and kind of say, okay, it just means do some due diligence. It just means there's something new about this that feels uncomfortable. And then you check in, is this a legitimate comfort? Is this a legitimately uncomfortable and meaning we should not do it? Or is it just uncomfortable because we haven't done it before? Yeah.
Yeah. Is this so? I'll give you an example. So I
Mm.
recently took on a client reached out to me who wanted to do work that was new for me outside of my comfort zone. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I brought in a colleague to kind of handle the piece that was really brand new to me, but it was still a stretch for me. And that was scary. And I felt like a fraud taking on this project. And I had to interrogate that feeling and say, like, does this mean I should step away from this project because I'm not qualified to do this work? And I had that kind of imposter syndrome question.
Mm.
Um, and I ended up what it spurred me to do was like I didn't actually have an answer to that. So I talked to the colleague that I'd brought in and acknowledged my ignorance in all these different areas, and wanted to make sure she was okay with that. Right? Like, does she still want to move forward with me, given what I've acknowledged as like my limitations? And then we talked to the client. I'm great at this. I'm not good at this. Just so you know, this is going to be like a learning aspect for me. So I'd love to have that conversation with you. And um, it felt very rich to have those conversations because I really value that integrity of saying, yes, I know I can help you in this way, but this is new to me. So that's what that feeling helped me do, was recognize the tough conversations I needed to have to move
Oh,
forward.
thank you for sharing that. That's such a great story and relatable story. I think about when you're applying for a position that you don't feel entirely qualified for, but you really want it. The idea of actually saying what it is, and we'll talk about when and where and how you decide when those risks are okay and safe, but is so it actually might feel and confident to the person receiving it too, because there's a groundedness in what you are good at and then an awareness of where you have room to grow, which but mainly what I love about it is it just feels relaxing. It's like, oh, I don't have to hold in secret all of this stuff that we may
I
not.
don't have to pretend I know this. It's like I've already
It's exhausting.
acknowledged.
It's so
Yeah.
tiring to pretend. And
Yeah.
that can hold you back even more, I'm assuming, kind of a bit of paralysis when you're pretending.
Can I also just say, like, a really important nuance there is, like, having confidence in the things that you're good at too is equally as important.
Mm,
It's kind of like we can't just, um it's hard to go forward in work just talking about the things we're bad at.
right.
Um, and I feel that it's especially for me, I really value that humility, and I can overplay the um, giving into imposter syndrome and talking about all the things I'm bad at. It's also been a growth for me as an entrepreneur to step into like, no, I really am good at this stuff, and I'm okay to talk about that as well.
Mm. And how do you get to that point? Do you think it's just time?
I had a mentor. I asked that exact question to a mentor 13 years ago when I started my company. And, she said, you got to fake it till you make it. And I thought it was the worst advice ever because I was like, I really value integrity, as I already said. Like that felt so wrong to me. Um, but in hindsight, I wonder if that's the only way to do it. With the like subtlety of, you do have experience, you do know things that you are good at. So don't be afraid to talk about those things, however, small they might be in the grand scope of things you want to do, and move forward from that place of strength while also just being really aware of how you want to grow.
Mm,
Um, and I think that messaging, um, as you build a business for yourself, for your teammates, even for your clients in certain circumstances, can be really powerful because it says, I am learning and growing with you. We're doing this together. I'm bringing you in as a partner. We're going to figure this out together. We're on the same team. Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. I think in organizations we have rich resources when we can rely on one another instead of just assuming that I need to know everything. I've had to learn that a lot over my career.
Oh
To
my
be not that I didn't think I needed other people, but I didn't think I could show that I needed other people.
gosh.
And
I
so
have had to learn how to ask for help
yes,
and see that as a strength. You
yeah,
can do that with incredible strength and charisma and confidence.
mm, yeah, but
And it really does bring people together.
it does exactly, and it makes you closer, I think, with people. But it is hard to get to. So we're talking about the fear of failure preventing us from acting when we fail.
Mm.
Want to talk about that a little bit because I want to ask: do we treat all failures equally as a culture, as a society? And how do we talk about that, Ashley? Like when you talk about failure, when you think about failure, when you recommend and you support and consult with companies through failures, um, I guess I'm wondering, is it safe to encourage people, all people, to fail and to risk
Mm.
failure? And is there a sort of privilege as part of this conversation we need to think about? For the person who doesn't have a lot of safety nets, for example, or are there cultural and I'm sure there must be gender and cultural considerations. And I'd love to explore that with you a little bit.
Yeah, there's so much to this question. So there's our individual experience of how we handle our own failures, and then there's how the people around us handle our failures and respond to them. Um, so for our own inner experience of failure, something I feel very passionately about. First of all, everyone fails across the board, around the world, regardless of where you stand in the hierarchy of your organization. Like, everyone fails. The the number one thing that almost everyone gets wrong is we're really hard on ourselves in times of failure. And it has the exact opposite impact we want it to. We think that we have to be hard on ourselves or we're like letting ourselves off the hook or something. But absolutely no learning can happen if we're piling the shame and regret on because it makes it too painful to actually look at that experience, and learn and grow from it. We have to show up with gentleness and compassion for ourselves, when we fail, and give ourselves the time that we need to grieve. And I use that word very deliberately because I think because failure is a kind of like a mini death. Like it's we the life we thought we were going to have, the success we had tied our hopes to, like that has died. We
Mm,
need to grieve that loss of what we thought would happen, who we thought we were, what we thought we would get. and give ourselves time to emotionally process that before we can actually look at our failures and grow from that. And it's that sadness, that grief that actually helps us grow as humans.
Wow. Can before we get into the other part of the question, I just want to pause there because that was so rich. So when you're working with an organization, is that part of what you need to let them do? Is kind of identify what was lost, even just to start?
I mean, I think, and identifying what's lost and acknowledging the most people in an organization don't feel safe enough to show up grieving. So it's how do you give space for whatever emotions are coming up, for
Mm.
whatever sadness or regret or anger or frustration. I mean, the emotions just go on and on. Yeah.
And if
We've
you
all
let them out,
experienced them.
does that help? Because we had a failure recently, maybe a couple of years ago. We had a program that just wasn't structured according to what we kind of knew were the principles of a good program, but we decided to try it anyway.
Mhm.
And it failed and it didn't work. And the funder was not happy. And so, on many levels, sort of, even the proposal itself, the rolling of the execution, knowing it wasn't going to work, the communication sort of with the funder, and then the funder being really upset. All of it was many fails. And I wonder about that. I mean, I think what worked for us is right from the top down, we admitted where we made mistakes, which I think helped. But if we hadn't done that, I could see it could be easy to blame the implementers, for example, of it, um, or the funder for kind of
Yeah.
funding it. I think there could have been blame in many directions, and I wonder, but I don't think we went through any kind of grieving process, which is interesting to think about. And so it still comes up, and we still sometimes talk about it. We're like, oh yeah, that thing, and then we kind of try and
Yeah.
push
And I
it.
imagine nobody wants to revisit it because
Mhm.
it feels bad. And there's all these incentives, especially when you got a funder who's upset, to be defensive. Like that's our instinct. We
Yes,
want
100%.
to figure out how it wasn't our fault because it feels better if it wasn't our fault. So I mean, just honoring what you did do as something that is incredible and doesn't get done often enough is really trying to take that objective look at what happened. It's been
Mhm.
my experience that to do that really well requires creating space where folks can kind of process the emotions that come with a failure. Even just be heard. I swear that's like 50% of my job is on the call and I hear someone telling their version of what happened, and they're so grateful just to be able to share it and feel heard and validated that their experience is true and real and valid and has important learning. And my job is to help them get to that place where they can acknowledge that they have learned a lot and they have all this hugely valuable learning that needs to be returned back to the organization, but they have to tell that story in their anger and their sadness and their frustration before they can look at that learning and feel good about sharing it with folks, and be willing to like hear other perspectives too. Because I often am in a situation where you got 5 people involved in a failure and you get 5 different versions of what happened. Some people don't even see it as a failure. It's like all are true and valid, and I'm here to sort of bring out how do we take the wisdom from this to move forward, stronger, better,
Do
wiser.
you think executives don't want to talk about failure because they don't want to get blamed?
Oh my goodness, that's a no. I think executives, at least the executives I've worked with, have been exceptional. And the hard part about being the executive is that their failures are so impactful.
Yeah.
Like, and they know that, right? Like when they screw up, it often means people's jobs, livelihoods, right? So admitting that your F up, you know, caused such great harm is psychologically a very, very difficult thing to do. And you're asking them to do it at a terrible moment in their life. So it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they want to be deceptive. It's that depending on the scale of the failure, and I've come across some very large ones, which makes it all the more difficult for those executives to own it because the consequences are so great that psychologically they're not ready to own it yet.
Can you give us an anonymous example of something like that where an executive had failed and what happened when they were able to admit it? Like what kind of healing in that organization or how when they dealt with it directly?
Yeah, I think maybe the best case that I can think of is it was a client I had who um, basically let down their members in a couple of instances. So they were running this exam and had had all these technical troubles the first time they ran it and thought that they'd fix them all and ran the exam again and had all these other technical troubles again. And it really broke trust of all of these thousands and thousands of members in the ability of this organization to run these exams for their group. Um, and it was interesting because what we got down to in the root of yes, we wanted to examine sort of why the failure happened and get to the root of that, which ended up being like a whole bunch of technical reasons and like it was some like hacker behavior and all these other things. Like they had a few things working against them. But what was actually super valuable for this organization through that experience was in managing the broken trust with their membership. They realized that they didn't that even before all this technical stuff happened and these failures happened, they didn't have enough trust and relationship with their members. And that, you know, that this would be a great opportunity to take advantage of really getting to know their membership and letting their membership know them and building a much stronger, better um, link between the two. That they weren't just like this oversight body that runs this exam for them. It's like, no, we're here. We want to support you. We want to make sure this industry is like the most successful it can be. So I think that's what's possible when you're willing to look at the kind of deeper reasons for your failure and process it and come out wiser on the other side.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you have to be willing in that moment. Yeah, you have to be. I'm just thinking as the leadership, like you have to be willing to, yeah, admit that you might have been wrong. And I think that's hard. I think that's in. I guess the people that hire you are probably probably move beyond that point. But I can think of lots of examples where it's hard to decide, especially amongst a whole team of people. I'm thinking of a previous place where I worked, for everyone to be on the same page with this is the best way to go. So yeah, very challenging, very challenging.
Yeah. If you want like if you want like just PR to like cover up your
Right.
mistake, they don't come to me.
No, exactly.
Yeah, like which is wonderful. I don't want to talk to those
Yeah,
people anyway.
it's not your.
I want the folks that are ready to kind of learn and grow and through the experience.
Mhm.
And that is hard work. That is
Yeah.
hard work. Anyway, but there was another part of your question that was
Well,
very much on how society treats us in failure
yes,
that I
and
don't
what
want to
are
ignore.
yes, no, but this was good because we needed to kind of talk about this part first. So I appreciate that. So if we go back to kind of yeah, what do we treat all failures equally? And is the kind of that fear assessment and that risk assessment the same for everybody?
So there is some just spectacular research around this that when we fail, if we look like the person that society expects to see in that job, we are often given the grace of a second chance. People will respond to us in our failure, saying things like, "Oh, you just weren't set up for success. Like you just need," or like, "Oh, that was such bad luck." You're given a chance, and the folks around you respond in a way that helps you kind of externalize blame to outside forces, and you get to try again. Um, the counter to that is that if you don't look like the person that people expect to see in that role, society will often, those around you will be more likely to say things like, oh, you just weren't cut out for it. And like maybe you didn't put in the effort, you just didn't have enough experience or whatever. And internalize the responsibility for the failure is internalized when very obviously, when I frame it like that, almost all failures are caused by external forces, bad luck, the market, whatever, inflation, and our own the own decisions we made or capacities we have. It's always a balance of both, and we can learn from both. But the unfortunate part of that is that when we don't look like the person people expect, we hear that message over and over again that it was our fault when we failed, and we can start to internalize that message. Um, and think, oh, I really am not cut out for this. I shouldn't take that risk because I wear it in a way that my colleague that does look the person you expect in that role does. And, an example would be like a female pilot, right? Is not what you expect to see in that role. If she fails, it's attributed to her. Um, Not as true for male
Mm,
pilots, but whereas like a male nurse, is the same
mm.
thing,
Not
suffers
cut
the
out
same
for it.
sort of discrimination. Yeah. So I think what I think is really important here is we need to acknowledge that programming, that's how we're responding to other people's failures, and make sure we are giving everyone the grace of a second chance,
Mm,
assuming the best, and and empowering them to try again,
mm.
assisting them.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we think about anti-bias training in hiring, and I haven't heard it spoken about in terms of how we respond to mistakes or failures. And so I think that that's beautiful. Do you
Can I
define?
also say one more thing on that?
Yeah, please.
If you're in a role that you don't look like who you expect to see, who society expects to see in that role, like, please don't take it personally
Mm,
when you fail and people respond like that.
mm.
Like, that's not you. That's like the horribly unfair society we live on. Um,
But
yeah.
doesn't it mean that that person would have to be taking those more seriously? Because what if there's real impacts? And I guess that's what they have to decide is
And
when
that's the like
risk.
horribly unfair part,
Yeah,
right?
they're having to evaluate extra things in their risk assessment of an action.
Yeah. Um, and for someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of safety nets around them,
Mhm.
like, there are severe impacts to our failures. We lose our job. We, sink a whole bunch of money into something that doesn't come to fruition.
Yeah,
Um, and that can be a real risk. So yes, listen to that intuition, our gut feel around the risks that we want to take, and are the risks real, and do the work needed to prepare as much as possible, and step away if needed. I think it's just I but I want to make sure I acknowledge like the unfairness of that,
yeah,
because I feel like that's
absolutely.
important.
Yeah, that's right. It is. It's not fair, and it's important to acknowledge when we're saying, address the, know the fear and do it anyway. It's a little bit too simplistic, and that's sort of what I was wanting to address here. Is that that's not what we're saying either.
Not at all, because that's not realistic for
Yeah,
a lot of folks.
yeah,
Yeah, or like fail fast and break things. That's fine if you're writing, a couple lines of code and testing it and like can rewrite it or whatever. But it's something else if you don't have the ability to just easily test it cheaply.
that's right.
There are a lot of different cases.
That's right. And even just for example, female founders competing for funding, and we know that they are far less successful in achieving funding than male counterparts. And so even just that is an example of what we're willing to put up and mortgage and put on the line. It's sort of, yeah, working towards a better world and at the same time living in this world and acknowledging what those actual tigers around the corner are. Thank you, Ashley. I wanted to ask you, do you when you were talking about how everybody has a fear of failure, is
Mm.
it a personality trait that you're born with, or is it something that we learn, or both? So what I'm thinking about is we tend to stereotype certain characters and characteristics as just having no fear, or and certain types of athletes and certain types of thrill seekers, certain types of founders, especially founders, we have this persona that they're just willing to take all these risks.
Mm.
And when I talk to a lot of founders, that's not the case at all. They've actually often started their career very gently and slowly while they were working in a solid job, trying and testing something out. They didn't just kind of self farm. And so I just wanted to ask that question of you about whether you think some people are just born with more risk tolerance versus less, and or is it something we can learn?
Oh, it's such a rich question. I mean, I I almost want to put it back to your listeners and maybe to you, Gina. Like, do
Yeah.
you feel you were born fearful or risk tolerant, one or the other? Or have you had different places in your life, or there's different aspects of your life or different times in your life when you felt like you could take more risks or not?
Yeah, it's such a great. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. We could turn this into a therapy session.
Yeah, my
I,
work often does turn into a therapy session.
I feel like for me, it's a little bit attached to anxiety, which I didn't have in my when I was younger, and have kind of well, I did in some ways around certain things, but not very often. And so I was often able to take quite a lot of risk, maybe also, but I just sort of would feel confident that I could figure things out. I just had this confidence just in me. I don't know, probably for parenting, maybe some genetics, maybe certain types of privileges. Although I didn't have a financial safety net ever to fall onto, to back onto with my family, but I guess that's comparative and contextual. So but I do think that I have far less ability to take risks when it comes to family questions versus when it comes to work questions. So yeah, I guess I feel like you're right. It's a lot of different things. And I also find it I wonder how much it's related to mental health. And sometimes, because I definitely feel like when my mental health started to decline a little bit, in uh, and anxiety and depression was a thing for me, then it became harder for me to assess. I think what was an appropriate type of risk for me to take, and appropriate types of risks.
Oh my god. Yeah, there's so much richness in what you just shared, and I think it speaks to the fact that it, at least in my experience, and I would invite your audience to kind of decide for themselves what their answer is to this question,
Mm,
but like at least in my experience, it's been ever changing.
yeah,
Where at different parts of my life, like I have a lot more to lose now than I
yeah.
did when I started my company 13 years ago. So my risk tolerance is different. Um, there's also this aspect of that we don't think about that much, but you have to feel really safe to take risks, or
Mm,
most of us do. So it has this kind of oscillation inherently built into it, where it's like, okay, I'm feeling safe. Feeling safe. I can take that risk. Oh crap. Now I don't feel safe, and now I need to like do something that's like a little bit easier, a little bit softer and gentler, and like build up that confidence again. Okay, now I can take a like it has kind of built-in cyclical nature to it, and I think so. I want to speak to the anxiety and depression piece, but first I just say like wherever you're at with your risk tolerance, to me it's not trying to shape that one way or the other, but can you harness the the risk tolerance you have right now to be in pursuit of your deepest longings and how you want to be in the world, whatever you've got. Align it with how you want to be in the world, and you'll always be headed in the right direction with whatever risk tolerance you have. um,
that's beautiful. So I think that's just the perfect right thing to. That's the right message. It makes so much sense. It's about it doesn't really matter what kind of risk tolerance you had 10 years ago or what kind of risk tolerance or fear of failure you're going to have in 10 years. What matters is getting in touch with what it is right now. What's realistic right now? What do you have to lose right now? What do you not have to lose right now? Where do you feel safe? Where are you safe? Where are you unsafe? And then
totally.
making that decision. And that goes back to our sort of discriminatory conversation as well. So yeah, thank you. That's great.
Mm. I might add one more thing to that
Yeah.
you so beautifully said, was like, just from my own experience, I was born feeling a lot. Like I have very big feelings. And one might think that would make me more risk averse, but it never has really, because I've been in pursuit of things I was very ambitious about and felt very strongly about. But it has mean that I have had to learn ways to build in time to recover from risk taking.
Mhm.
I love taking those risks. It's really important to me, but I know if it doesn't work out, I need to be gentle with myself. I need all these reminders that it's okay to just stay in bed
Yeah.
and, grieve and heal and cry and whatever that, because I know I need that time. So there's like other aspects to things we
Mhm.
may be born with that come into importance around this topic.
Right. So they can still do it, but put all of those pieces in place so that you're taking care of yourself when.
Yeah, I think there's a huge part we don't talk about enough. It's like acceptance for where we're at.
Yeah.
And just, why would you fight what is? It's
Yeah.
only going to make it more miserable.
Yeah.
Um, and how do we accept what is? Which is really important to my work because the hardest thing with failure is accepting what has happened. That's the only way we learn and grow from it. So how do we just accept who we are, what happened, how it happened, and be really gentle
Yeah,
with
how
it?
do we? And that kind of leads into that question of what are the is there kind of a little bit of a guidebook for what people should do when they fail? So we know like when we break up with our partner, we should buy ice cream and we should rent the movies and we should lay in bed and our best friends should come over
Mm,
and hang out with us or take us out for beers and take us out to a party or something, depending on who we are. But what are there
mm.
is there sort of a little pro tip list for people when they fail?
Oh, that's so interesting. I feel a bit uncomfortable giving like, here are your 3 steps to recover from failure because everybody is really different. Um, I think the one that I hear myself saying the most is around time to grieve.
Mhm.
Oh, and I think I say that the most because it's the one um, that most often people haven't come in contact with. No
Right.
one's given them permission yet to feel their feels
Mm.
and be there with their feels. Um, but in counter to that, I'd also say try not to get stuck there.
Mm.
Yes, honor how you're feeling. Ask yourself how you're feeling. Ask yourself where that's coming from. If you have a knot in the pit of your stomach that you can't get rid of, there's something there. Like your body is trying to tell you something. It's okay to take the moment to reflect on what that means and what that part of you needs to feel better. And from my experience, that can be very, very powerful to
Mm.
take that time. Danger, of course, um, is letting ourselves tell ourselves stories about what that means. Like instead of, I have failed, we start saying, I am a failure.
Mm.
And those two sentences are very, very different. Make sure that you're checking your inner monologue and inner judge and inner critic. You know, it's okay to have failed.
Mhm.
Everyone has failed, and honor the sadness and regret and whatever comes along with that. But that does not mean you are a failure. You are enough, um, and you are a beautiful whole human being because you have failed, not in spite of it.
Yeah, that's right. I think
I,
about
I there's a metaphor for this that I love,
yeah.
and it's from the book Rise by Sarah Lewis. And I'll look up the future. The whole title is The Rise: Creativity, the Gift of Failure, and the Search for Mastery
Mm.
by Sarah Lewis. And she talks about this Arctic explorer, Ben Saunders, who was trying to walk to the North Pole. But of course, there's no land under the North Pole, right? It's all like just floating sea ice. So he'd like walk all day, set up camp, get the sleep he needed to walk the next day, and like look at his GPS. And overnight, the currents of the ocean will have taken him and erased all the work he did the day before. And he had to like pack up his camp and start walking again that next morning. And you can imagine how demoralizing that could be, how much you might want to just stay in your tent and just say, F it, whatever, I'm done. So, what he would do is he would set his sight on an ice mound like 30 feet away. Just be like, if I make it there today, that's success. And pack up his bag and just start walking. And then, okay, I made it here. Okay, well, if I make it to that ice mound, then it's success. And
Mm.
it's like in this way, he very gradually, 30 feet at a time, walked his way to the North Pole. despite all
Yeah,
those moments that pulled him back.
that's
And I
really
think that's what it feels like
yeah,
walking
you
out
know
of
what
a
I love
failure
about that
sometimes.
too is I think that that helps when you were talking about how a lot of most failures attach to things that we can't control in an organization when you're running a team. I think that that way of thinking, instead of if you get to the North Pole at success or failure, it's the incremental successes along the way is a far more realistic way of managing kind of expectations, and also managing the process to get there. You know, if the manager is only gonna, if the leader is only gonna check in when they've reached it or not, they also have no time to course correct along the way. So there's no time to course correct. There's also no time to celebrate those incremental successes, which for a lot of people too, if your staff are in, if part of the staff in your company are in process work, they may never actually see those long-term results and celebrate those. So I think that's a really lovely metaphor for a whole bunch of reasons. And
Mm.
including, I remember when I had a baby, in the first year, I remember having to choose just one thing a day. I don't know, I probably read it or someone probably told me to do this, but one thing a day that was success. So it was like, if I empty the dishwasher today, I've done enough. And so anything else was bonus work. But I had to pare back my expectations. And so I think it's a little bit about expectation setting too. But to just, yeah, one thing. It was like my 30-foot ice, like 30 feet ahead was like just one chore. So yeah, I think that's cool too. It's just sort of setting yourself up, like we said, according to what is realistic in your life right now and for your organization or for yourself.
Mhm.
Ashley, before we go, you had some really cool resources for people who want to kind of flex this muscle or want to get curious about um, getting more comfortable taking risks, maybe getting more comfortable addressing their fear of failure. I was wondering if you could share some of those resources with us.
Sure. So, probably the most relevant one, like if you're going to read one thing, I'd recommend Dr. Pippa Grange's book called Fear Less. Um, and because my favorite concept from this book is around winning shallow versus winning deep. So it really speaks to the reason we pursue things. So the winning shallow is like, I want to compete, I want to dominate, I want to win, I want to that piece. And that type of winning will only sustain you for so long. And she compares that to winning deep, where it's like, I want to grow and expand as a human being.
Mm,
And that kind of pursuit gives you enough heart to sustain the ups and downs. So that was my favorite concept from the book, but it is full of very practical advice about how to fear less.
thank you.
And maybe another one, and is one we haven't talked about,
Yeah.
but um, when things do fall apart, as they will. If this conversation has done anything, I hope it's helped destigmatize failure for
Yes,
folks.
exactly.
um, and just to help folks in those moments when we do fall down, the resource that I use when I'm in my darkest moments was written by Pema Chodron. I'm
Oh,
really
yeah.
not sure if I'm presenting her name right, but it's called Things Fall Apart, and I find it just so beautiful and wise and grounding in those moments that it is the thing that I reach for in those tough times.
I have heard so many people recommend not just that book, but her to me that I've got to get that book and I've got
Yeah.
to because now you're making me realize I have keep not doing that. And she is an incredible, I think, thinker, philosopher, spiritual leader. Um, and I think those are two really excellent pieces of advice for folks.
Can I give one more?
Yeah,
Because I think
please.
it will be helpful. It's 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman.
Okay.
Uh, and what I love about this book is he basically sets it up as like, you only have 4,000, on average, we have 4,000 weeks to live. Like, how are you going to spend that time?
Mm,
And it's very powerful that way, and fun to read. And there's a piece in there that like fundamentally shaped who I am as a person, where he talks about problems far from being the thing that you have to solve and fix. Like you have to come to the end of your to-do list and then you can have a meaningful, wonderful life. So far from being the impediment to a meaningful life, problems are the substance of it. Like, you will never reach the end of your to-do list. There will always be problems. So stop like trying to fight all those things, and then you'll get to live your life. Rather, see those problems as the substance, and how you respond to them and how you interact with them is the substance of your meaningful life. And I found that reframing just spectacularly powerful.
That is spectacularly powerful. We are not trying to get to the end of work, the end of hard, the end of the to do list. This is what it is about. And so, figuring
Live now.
out
Yeah.
Dr. Grange can guide us through that. Okay, well, if we accept that, then how do we kind of go deeper and how do we figure out how to do what is meaningful to us, do what is meaningful to the world? What a beautiful conversation, Ashley. Thank you so much. I think failure is something that we don't love to talk about, and have a hard time even just, yeah, we like to talk, we like to talk about it, how are we manifesting all of these good things in our lives? And then sometimes at the end of the day, when all those good things haven't necessarily manifested, what exactly is it that we're left with? So this is super real.
Mm.
And I hope, and I know for our listeners, they're going to have appreciated this. So thank you for everything that you do, Ashley.
It's been such a pleasure, Gina. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.